Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Erickson from the online magazine, The Raven Review. Welcome to Raven Review's Election 2016 weekly interviews on 6 crucial topics. Today, I am so excited because it's our last conversation. I'm sad about that, but I'm excited because it's our conversation on truth, lies, and political scapegoating with Dr. Hanna Mäkelä. Hi, Hanna.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. We have many live guests in the chat room. I'll bring in questions that they have as we have our conversation. And this conversation is especially important for 2 reasons. It's timely because next week Americans will have decided who our next president is going to be. And it's also timely because, as you know, and as other people who are influenced by René Girard know, tomorrow is November 4th, which will be the 1-year anniversary of his death. And Girard's work has opened our eyes to so many things when it comes to politics and religion. And so, Hanna, it's a great pleasure for me to be able to talk with you today about Girard and these topics. Hanna, you recently received your PhD in 2014, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Congratulations on that. What was it? What was your dissertation on?
It was called Narrated Selves and Others, a study of mimetic desire in 5 contemporary British and American novels, English language novels. Well, the contemporary part of it was a bit stretched because the oldest one was first published. The oldest novel that I was studying from a Girardian point of view was published in the early 1960s, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. And the latest one was Siri Hustvedt's What I Loved in 2003.
Nice.
So
now,
early 60s to early 2000s.
Okay.
And yeah.
You used the phrase mimetic desire.
Yes.
And this is a big, giant academic term. People who are into Girardian thought know it automatically. But
Yes.
not everybody in our audience knows this word.
Okay.
So can you give, Girard claims to have found this certain truth about human relationships and uses the term mimetic desire, mimetic theory, in order to point to that truth. Can you give like a brief kind of mimetic theory 101 for people?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The truth that you, Adam, already alluded to is what Girard called the novelistic truth, and he opposes that with a lie, and that lie is the romantic lie, according to him. Now, in the French original, there's an obvious pun involved. It's called mensonge.
Yeah, this is his book in English titled Deceit, Desire in the Novel,
yes.
Right? Yes. Okay.
Yes. In English, Yvonne Freccero was the one who translated it into English in the mid-60s. The book first came out in 1961, and it was called Mensonge romantique et vérité romanesque. So it would be an exact translation would have been the romantic lie and the novelistic truth, and there's a pun involved with the words romantique and romanesque. But of course, English is one of the only Western languages where that pun couldn't work. So it's a good translation. But the idea is that there are. It's not so much to do with genre per se, like there are novels and short stories and plays and fairy tales and poems. It's about novels in this book, but there are 2 kinds of novels, and according to Girard, most of those novels would unfortunately fall under the auspices of the romantic ones. And by romantic, he's not talking so much about a periodic term of romanticism, but he's talking about a certain kind of psychology in a novel where the character is a romantic figure, a kind of passionate subject who is after certain objects like a love interest or a nature experience or something like that, and he triumphs or he tragically loses. But what Girard would like to point out the reader's attention to instead is the other kind of novel, the novel where this kind of romantic illusion of a romantic heroic subject who is driven by his passions and who chooses his own objects in life is replaced by a more psychologically realistic one where the person realizes that this kind of romanticism is an illusion, and he or she, in these cases usually a he, although there is Madame Bovary of Flaubert, who is a woman, but as it happens, these examples are focused on male characters, and the idea is that the novelistic truth is comes about when the novel's main character realizes that his former life in the story has been an illusion and that he should know better. And what where mimetic desire comes in is the interrelationality of different subjects. For example, in Crime and Punishment, there is the anti-hero Raskolnikov, but Raskolnikov is relationally, he has relations with other characters, and these relations are very important because they influence him. He would like to be autonomous, but he is in fact influenced by the other. Shall I continue with the...
No, so the romantic
Yes.
lie is this idea of autonomy?
Yes.
Yeah, that
Like
we are just...
the subject is independent and desires spontaneously. That is, for Girard, the romantic lie, whereas the novelistic truth would be the sort of, well, he doesn't like the word demystification, but you could say a sort of demystification or a kind of deconstruction of that kind of romanticism. And he actually, according to him, the best novels, the novelistic novels, expose the romantic lie, and instead they reveal that people are not spontaneously desiring, but that they borrow their desires from other people. They perceive that the other whom they look up to desires something, some object, a job, a love interest. It can actually be anything, and they want it for themselves because the other one already wants it. And that leads to conflict. So
I was just about to ask, this leads to conflict. I was just about to ask, why does this truth matter?
It matters because, well, it's the psychological truth that points to the fact that people are not islands unto themselves, like in the famous John Donne poem, "No man is an island." We are part of the main. So it's about realizing that people are fundamentally similar in where it counts. They are being similar, and they want things that are not chosen by themselves. So if I want to get a really nice job at a bank, say, or at a university, which comes very close and is actually a reality in my case, I might want it, of course, because I want the money and I want to get by, but I probably want it because I've seen it appreciated by other people. And that's why I borrow my desires from my colleagues, from my superiors, from my teachers, from my parents, whatever, and then I pursue it. But and that's for Girard, this is like mimetic desire is a good thing, or it can be a good thing. It's really a neutral thing, but it can be a good thing when we don't have conflict. Say there are two friends who have done everything together, but then the other one falls in love and they cannot share the love object. Or the other one wants to have a job, a tenured job at a university. They both cannot have it. So there's conflict because they both want the same thing.
Yeah. Now, I want to bring this into politics, especially his book, Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. He has so many great quotes in there that point to the truth of this relationality. And one of them is this idea that the evil we see in the other is also the evil that we are consumed by. There's there's a
Exactly.
certain a mimetic element to this, and we often talk about imitating people that we admire, but we also imitate people that we hate.
Yes,
Maybe even at a more visceral level. And you see this in our current political situation all the time in
definitely.
politics. If one candidate wears a blue tie, the other one is going to try to differentiate himself from the evil other by wearing a red tie or a red suit. In the primaries, you had these accusations. Bernie Sanders was like, "Oh, we can't have Hillary Clinton because she's would just be disastrous for the United States."
Exactly.
And you had the same things going on in the primary under Donald Trump. We can't have him, but now everybody is just kind of falling into line in these camps. So this reverse imitation that we see in politics. Do you have any thoughts on this, like where René Girard is going with this?
Well, definitely. And the whole thing is that people want to be, they also very much want to be different because they want to be autonomous. They want to be islands unto themselves. And this, of course, is historically speaking, it is a reasonably, if we think in matters of centuries, it is not a recent phenomenon. It is a recent phenomenon, sorry, because the age of individualism, it sort of started with in late 18th century, early 19th century. So in that way, it actually coincided with the so-called romantic literary and artistic period. Or of course, it was a long time coming if you think about the Renaissance and sort of the apotheosis of the modern human subject. Whereas before that, we had the Middle Ages when people were part of a feudal system. Before that, the high cultures where there were slaves and there were masters and there were priestly castes. There was this caste system. Before that, there was the archaic so-called tribal system where there was and I don't mean this in a derogatory term at all when I say a witch doctor, for example, but nowadays everybody can be somebody. So everybody wants to say that, oh, I'm unique, I do not imitate. And the very irony, of course, is that by saying I do not imitate, other people who also want to be autonomous say I do not imitate, but they imitate the very fact of not imitating. So so it's kind of complicated when I put it like this, but it's actually the red tie and blue tie is very good, is a very good example, because when you when you see two people who are trying to be different, you're actually seeing people who are desperately trying to hide the fact of their similarities.
Yeah, I remember many years ago when we were started the war on terror. Uh, John Stewart had this great uh, parallel between what George Bush was saying about God and evil and what Osama bin Laden had said about God and
Mm-hmm.
evil. And it was almost as if they were saying the exact same thing, the exact same words. And John Stewart's like, guess which one said which?
Oh yes, that's it. And I think it's an old gag to have Hitler being quoted at people, and then people don't realize that it's Hitler. Actually, I don't know whether that's really happened, but there was a joke in one film where somebody said that. There are these idiotic statements by by a politician, and the politician said, "Oh, I don't remember saying that," and then the other guy said, "Well, uh, a good thing you didn't, because that was Hitler," you know. But I think one of life's greatest ironies is that Obama killed Osama, and
Yeah.
that's, you know, if somebody wrote a novel or a screenplay about that, critics would be all over the place and say like, okay, the writer really was trying to make a case, desperately trying to make a case. It's one of those things that it's amazing. It's actually amazing that coming from Girard, one could make a case with the presidential candidates that the more they try to separate themselves from each other, the more they are actually coming together. And that was, of course, something you could see already in the Cold War. But in the Cold War, there was that famous balance of terror, or the balance of power, where no one dared to do anything because they were conscious of the fact that there would be a never-ending vendetta. Like, if you blow the bomb, then you blow the bomb. But nowadays, when there's no binaries in that neat way anymore, there's more individualism, and there's, on the other hand, and there's more balkanization with smaller communities and splits within political parties. So there's no balance to really keep people on their best behavior. People are behaving badly because there's nothing to stop them from behaving badly. There's no system, there's no grid, there's no lid to keep the steam under the lid in a kettle. It boils over.
Yeah,
because there's no institutional brake. The brakes are off. The bike is rolling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the ways that Girard points out that we try to stop people from behaving badly is through bad behavior ourselves. So we tend to mimic the violence that we see around us, claiming that our violence is justified and good, but theirs is not. And he really gets into this through his book, Violence and the Sacred. And this is my only copy. Unfortunately, my dog ate the cover of it right here. But
the dog has a good taste in books.
Right. So that's my copy of Violence and the Sacred, where he really gets into the scapegoating mechanism and violence. And we see this mechanism happening in the elections in basically all around politics. Politics tends to be all about scapegoating. But can you tell us a little bit about the scapegoating mechanism and what Girard means by that?
Yes, and if I made at all sense when I was talking about the mimetic conflict, the idea is that when people desire mimetically, they borrow their desires from the other, and eventually there is conflict because there's not enough objects to go around. So people, there's the idea of a kind of scarcity of objects, not in the materialist way of Marx, but in a way that we cannot always have the same thing as the other is having. So there is conflict, and the more conflict we have, the less about the object, the less the object actually matters. Because we are so focused on our rivals. The rivals for the object lose sight of the object. And that brings us to politics, for example, because politics is a case where the real object is completely metaphysical, in the way that it is the prestigious position of being president that matters. So there's no object. Now, to control people from destroying each other via reciprocal vendettas or brotherly feuds, the myths abound with enemy brothers. For example, the ancient Romulus and Remus. Romulus killed Remus and became the first ruler of Rome. But then again, there's the Greek myth where Eteocles and Polynices take turns ruling Thebes. But at one point there's civil war and they cannot keep it in control, and they end up quite logically killing each other. Now, archaic societies, pre-consciously, not consciously, but pre-consciously, they could see that the more people behaved similarly, the more they had things in common, the more they resembled brothers, the more dangerous the whole community, the community's cohesion was at stake. So they erected taboos and negations. You could not practice incest because incest was about people of the same family coming together, and that could lead to all sorts of things. They were afraid of twins. They were afraid of homosexuals. Everything that had to be. They were afraid of two people basically being similar. So at one point through evolution, according to Girard, those communities that could ward off this rivalry, that they could somehow settle it, those communities tended to thrive. And Girard's hypothesis is that there was foundational murder, a case where rivalries became so intense that actually the group ended up killing one member. And by killing one member of the group, they actually found out that was a pacifying moment. Instead of killing each other or really like arguing, they had a body that had been killed by the group. And that sense of unanimity and sort of letting off steam became cathartic. And according to Girard, and this happened during centuries and centuries and centuries, it was that lynching, that foundational murder, actually became reenacted through rituals, and those rituals became sacrificial religious institutions, and those worked with deliberate scapegoating mechanisms, where you would have someone who would be sacrificed so that there would not be reciprocal warfare or reciprocal strife, and the society would remain cohesive, but they had to let off steam once in a while. So they had human sacrifices, and then eventually human sacrifices were so bad that people actually started to have animal sacrifices. But so there's always sacrifice, even where there are no like explicitly human sacrifices in the way of Maya sacrificing criminals of like prisoners of war. You could have pastoral systems where cattle was sort of, there were pastoral, there are still pastoral nomads who sort of have alter egos in cattle, and then they sacrifice cattle instead of sacrificing each other. And that is the basis of what Girard calls archaic religion, what in previous days politically incorrectly would have been called paganism or heathenism or natural religion, as opposed to the religions of the book.
One of the things that I appreciate about Girard is that he says that he often scapegoated archaic religions. And he says now these archaic religions in their sacrificial practices were geared towards something very good, which is peace, right?
Exactly. A hypocritical peace, but peace nevertheless.
Yeah, a short, temporary peace that came at the expense of a victim. And we see it today because we still have this idea that their idea was this violence brought a sense of peace. And we still are dealing with this idea that violence, if we just get rid of those that we call our enemies, eventually we will have peace. We see it throughout human history, and it's what we're having to deal with in the present too. So it's not like some people often think it's a big leap to go with Girard on these ancient, but we're still dealing with it today. So I've always appreciated that about him. Jim Crane from Lake Oswego has an important comment and question. This election has brought my attention to the tendency to subscribe to the strategy of the end justifies the means. This is used to justify distortions of the truth and outright lies. While I feel one candidate is outrageously subscribing to this philosophy, it is more interesting to me to find out what forces work against this strategy and what social barriers can and should be used. Does mimetic theory suggest any of these? And this leads us into Girard's third book, which we'll get to in a little bit, called Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. But do you have any response to what Jim is getting at here?
A very good question, Jim. Thank you. It was, I think it's very interesting because that's how humanity has always worked, or we're hardwired to work like that, that the end justifies the means. And the means would be using some violence to fight or to sort of preempt bigger violence. And that was something of a credo with the former, not foreign minister, but Secretary of Defense, I think is the term, Robert McNamara, who made the documentary film The Fog of War with Errol Morris, the great documentary filmmaker. And he always, and Robert McNamara, in a kind of cynical way, but in an earnest way as well, said that the casualties must be proportionate in the way that we cannot kill a lot of people for a cause, but we can kill some people for a cause. And of course, from a Christian, Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic, and perhaps a universal moral code that many of us adhere to, and secular humanism, that sounds terrible. But like you said about scapegoating, archaic religions, we should be more aware of it now, so we have less excuses. And I think the big issue is, what are there any means ever to justify ends that means could justify? Because I think it was Gandhi, or I think, who said that means are everything. You know, means and ends are the same. And he was talking from a post-sacrificial point of view, I think. And the thing is that, according to Girard, it is the victim as a unique, precious individual who is identical with all other people, when that fact of the singularity of the victim and the victimhood of the victim, the fact that there is no other reason than victimage to justify his or her death, once that is revealed, then we can no longer scapegoat in the same way that we have scapegoated before. What has become, perhaps I'm jumping the gun a bit, but one thing is that actually scapegoating has changed in the way that we are scapegoating scapegoaters. So we're saying that Hillary is a scapegoater because her actions or non-actions in Benghazi caused the death of the of some of the people there. We say that Donald Trump is a scapegoater because he has molested women and abused his and exploited his workforce and stuff like that. So we are scapegoating somebody who for being a violent person, whereas in ancient Rome or ancient Japan, it would not have been a bad thing to be a powerful scapegoater. And that's where the third book, Things Hidden, comes in, and that's one of the most controversial issues of Girard, raised by Girard, because he thinks that first Judaism, then Christianity, and of course his followers have argued for other religions as well, for example Islam and the Taoist and the Dharmist traditions of Asia, the world religions. But for Girard always talks about Judaism and Christianity because that's where that's the area he knows best. He says that when those historical religions came about, then we were more conscious about the victim, and that's when we could no longer scapegoat in the same success we had done before. Because in archaic religion, the myth of the victim as really having done something bad, it lives on through myth, whereas the gospel, and by gospel he also means like the stories of the prophets, the story of Joseph in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Old Testament, there is a shift of perspective. For example, in Girard's view, Oedipus was a myth about a king who had actually done bad things and deserved to be punished, deserved to be scapegoated. But then Joseph has the same elements of exile and incest and stuff like that. but he's revealed to be innocent, and he's the victim, and he's the hero for being a victim. So nowadays we are scapegoating, but we are scapegoating in a different way, because now it's cool to be a victim in a way. And in previous communities, it was very shameful of being a victim, and nowadays there's a glory to it.
It's interesting, and we see this in politics again. Donald Trump is claiming to be the victim of the media. The last week, Hillary Clinton is making the same move, similar move with the FBI on these. James Comey comes out and says we're reinvestigating.
Yes.
We're reinvestigating her emails. And people are just up in arms about the timing of this a week before the election. And so there is this move to be who's the bigger victim, because there's a power in this. So this good thing of listening to the voice of the victim can be abused.
Definitely it can. It's the so-called playing the victim card, and as you said once earlier, there are reasons for that, because there are real victims. But the point is that now it's cool to be a victim, and by saying I'm the victim, you're actually projecting guilt away from yourself and onto other people or other institutions. So you can always get away with things by saying that, well, I'm the victim. And that's, of course, very political, and it makes for a good politician to be able to sort of project guilt away, like being a Teflon kettle or a Teflon pot. Nothing sticks in you. And one way of washing the blame is to say that it's not my blame to begin with. It's those people. And that's why conspiracy theories are so popular, because there's meaning in conspiracy theories. And it's always a good thing if you can make it so that you're the victim of those conspiracy theories, and not of those conspiracies, and not the instigator of the conspiracy. Whereas in and this is a very coarse statement, but I like a phrase to say pre-Abrahamic or pre-Judeo-Christian or pre-Jewish religion, for example, the Roman Empire, against which Saint Augustine famously railed against. He said that the pagan empire is all about, getting your own way and projecting your will onto other people, and subjecting them and enjoying reaping your rewards. But in post-sacrificial or post-Jewish, post-Abrahamic society that we live in now, if it's really a case of post, or if we're actually being more Jewish and more Christian at the moment than we realize, that's one way where Girard is also going, that we don't want to say it, but we're actually more biblical and more in tune with the gospel message, even if we don't believe in God per se or something like that. But we are still believing in the fact that every victim, when a victim, is innocent for the things that he or she is being accused of. And of course, politicians and everybody can use it to, in a perverse way, to not be universal, not realizing the universal sameness of everybody, but saying that this or that is a better victim, and he or she is the worse victimizer.
One of the things about violence in the sacred that I've always appreciated is how Girard talks about ancient myths. And this is really where he gets into lies. We often, in the modern world, we often think of myths as stories that are true, that tell us something important about human beings. And Girard says it tells us something important about human beings, but it's that often our stories are lies about our victims. And Gil Bailey has this great book, Violence Unveiled, where he says that the word myth comes from the Greek word which means to close or to keep secret. And what myth tries to do is a story that silence is the voice of the victim. And
Yeah,
this
it
is where,
gags the victim. Yeah.
yeah. So these are stories where you don't hear the voice of the cultural victim, and we see this in politics all the time when some kind of scandal comes out and somebody says, "Oh, we have to control the narrative on this."
Yes.
Right? This
And
is
they're
where
actually saying it. It's interesting. And being a narrative scholar myself, where narrative can be the best thing in the world, it's actually terrible to hear the word narrative so abused. It makes you feel, as a narratologist, it makes me feel sort of dirty, because I get it that myths are bad, but narrative is good, right? Yeah.
right.
But for Girard, there are mythical narratives and there are gospel narratives, and I think he uses a very visceral image when he says somewhere that the myth is like a silk robe or a purple dyed robe, a silk robe, whereas the gospel is the skin of the animal, of the sacrificial animal. So I think this might be where he talks about the Hebrew Bible, for example, violence used in ancient Greek myths and violence used in the Bible. And of course, in the Bible, we get a lot of violence, and a lot of violence that seems to be justified, like God sends his violence against people who worship the golden calf and stuff like that. But I think it's Girard too, but Gil Bailey perhaps more pronouncedly said that the fact that the Bible does not hide its own message of violence actually works better to makes a better case for the Bible's honesty, because they are more historical. They may not be completely comfortable with the fact of a violent deity, but they show the violence for what it is. Whereas the myths oftentimes have Romulus sort of disappearing into the air, mystically leaving his domain. And Girard says that at this closed gap of the story, this silent period of the story, actually it's the moment of sacrificial murder. Romulus in the myth was actually, in the reality, was actually sacrificed, whereas in the Bible, both in the Hebrew Bible and in the Christian New Testament, the victim gets his voice. There is the disciple Stephen, who says that I am ready to die, and it's written down. He said he was ready to die, and in the case of Joseph is the main character. He's not the narrator, but he is in narrative theory we'd say he's the main focalizer. Things happen from his point of view, and he's the hero, and bad things happen to him, and he ends up forgiving the brothers who basically lynched him. They did not kill him, they almost killed him, but then at the last moment they sold him into slavery. So they basically, in a way, they sacrificed him anyway, and he forgives them. And of course, there are the Psalms, where the anonymous narrator says that, "Oh, I am surrounded by predators. The slings of my enemies are directed at me, and you alone, God, know my pain." And even in those cases where God is seen as someone who uses violence, and in the end, according to Girard, in the Gospels, we have, according to him, we have a non-violent God in Christ, and but before that, the violence is always there. Whereas in some ancient myths, the violence is perceived as something that is not really violence, that is somehow beautiful or somehow justified.
Yeah. So you've been talking about the Bible, which is really where Girard goes into with his book, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World.
I was anticipating.
No, and here he says that the Bible reveals this truth that ancient myths kind of concealed, which is the truth of the victim. And I love what you said about Joseph. You also see this with Cain and Abel, where Cain kills Abel, and from the ground, Abel's blood cries out to God. So the victim continues to have the voice of the victim continues to be heard. Even in the Exodus, the slaves, the Israelites, cry out, not to God, they just cry out, and God hears their voice and acts on their behalf. So you get this truth of hearing the voice of the victim in the Bible. One of the things that's relevant for our conversation about politics is when Pilate confronts Jesus.
Yes.
This is where the political ruler of Judea comes to the one who comes as the kingdom of God, the Messiah, right? So these two figures come face to face, and Pilate says, "What is truth?" And Jesus is silent, right?
Yes.
It's a great point in the Bible about truth and politics. What do you think about that moment? Do you have thoughts about that moment? And what is the truth?
Yes, I think. Well, what is the truth? Yes, if I knew that, I'd be a richer woman. No, but the truth in the Girardian context is it's basically the historical truth of what actually went on. But furthermore, it's like, who is the victim and what is gained by silencing the victim. And of course, an interesting thing is, I think it's in the Gospel of Luke, in one of the synoptic Gospels, where Herod, the ruler of the Jewish population, a foreign ruler, I think, but anyway, a ruler, a very not so popular ruler with the Jews, but he was the ruler of the Jewish population in Judea, and the Roman representative Pilate. They had a schism because they had conflicting interests. But once Jesus was sacrificed, once he was executed on the cross, they actually became friends, according to the Lucan version of the gospel events. And that is interesting. The interesting thing is that, and this is, I think, what is very important in Girard, is that it's not that people who commit violence are bad people. They are not these mustache twirling silent movie villains or sadists who just want to do bad things because that's so titillating to their depraved instincts. They are actually the family figures, the good servants, the good pillars of society, who want, as Jim was talking about, the means and the ends. They want a particular end that they conceive to be the good end. And so transgression and sadism and radical evil, they have no place there. On the contrary, they want to do good things, but they do not see the good of the individual. They see the good of the community. They see cohesion. They strive towards communal cohesion at almost any cost. So that cohesion forces them to not hear the individual victim, to release the guy who is actually guilty and condemn the guy who is not guilty.
I'm reminded of Caiaphas in the Gospels, who says, isn't it better, he's the high priest, he says, isn't it better for one person to die than for the whole nation to perish? And this is the what Girard calls basically the sacrificial principle. Like Caiaphas gets it. He gets
Caiaphas gets it, and yeah. And the fact that he gets it is actually troublesome, because in that, the more people get it and still do it, the more culpable they are, because in archaic times, people were not necessarily so contemplative about it. They were they were working on what worked, the pragmatic thing, and they were not necessarily conscious of, well, they certainly were not conscious of the word scapegoat, like let us now scapegoat, because once you say the word scapegoat, you're already revealing the mechanism behind surrogate sacrifice. You're saying that, well, he's only a scapegoat, he's not guilty, and we know it. And once you know it, you cannot go back. Caiaphas, ironically, I think, is also sort of nailing the, sort of sounding the death knell on the sacrificial principle by saying it out loud. In a more efficacious religious society where sacrifice worked, he would not have needed to say that. He's already in a state of what Girard would call the sacrificial crisis, the crisis of the sacrificial institution, sacrifice no longer working because people are too conscious of it, and you need a blanket of non-reflection, of non-consciousness to make such a machine work.
Yeah, Christian history has demonized Caiaphas for this. And I'm like, when I read that, I'm like, well, I have a lot of sympathy for Caiaphas. I mean, there's a lot going, like, he's in charge of keeping the peace, and here comes this rebel rouser. And I don't think Jesus is the threat that he thought he was, but I have a lot of sympathy for what Caiaphas is saying. Right?
I think well, I think you're being very mature in what Girard would say, that you're recognizing your own sacrificial impulses, and that's very good, because for Girard, the difference between the high priests and the medicine men and the shamans of the socially organized religious institutions, they are always saying that, look, here comes the guilty one, and let the lightning strike against him or her. Whereas the apostles, Peter and Paul and all the rest, they were saying that I am the biggest sinner. I witnessed Stephen's stoning and did nothing. I witnessed Christ's being taken away, and I sat at the fire with the other people, and when they asked me, were you not with him, I said, no, I was not with him, says Peter. This is actually a sequence that Girard very lucidly, I think, very insightfully analyzes in his book, The Scapegoat, which came after Violence and the Sacred. I think in the late 70s, I think in the early 80s or in the 80s, I think. But the thing that the apostles, the disciples of Christ, they knew what they had done, and so they were quick to judge themselves before they were judging others. And that's, for Girard, is the basic difference between archaic religious authorities, or the leaders or the pastors, and those of the sort of post-sacrificial era.
Yeah, it reminds me, one of the things that Girard says that I have found very convicting about my life is that he says it's always easy to see when other people are scapegoating, but very difficult to see when we are caught up in the practice ourselves. And we all do it. We all do it. Exactly. But we're blind to it because we don't want to see it in ourselves and project it onto others. This gets me to Jim's, our final question from Jim. There is said to be truth in fiction, and there is said to be truth in science, history, etc. What are good ways to think about truth, its universality, and its temporal properties?
I think one way of looking at the truth, both in fiction and in fact in politics, in everything, is, does it flatter you, or is it somehow non-flattery? Is it like the opposite of flattery? So if you write a narrative or tell a story where you yourself are the hero, then there the truth is not a very disagreeable one. On the contrary, I think in one of Girard's favorite literary examples, Dostoevsky's novel *The Idiot* has a very funny and insightful episode where there's this parlor game, and people are told to tell embarrassing stories about themselves, like what is the worst thing you ever did. And the thing is that everybody sort of tells a very flattering story, like, oh, I wasn't strong enough to resist the temptation to help an old woman, do something like that. Oh, I was so weak. And then there's the heroine of the novel, Nastasia Filipovna, who instigated the game. And I think the word that was used to describe her reaction to her game really going awry was she was disgusted. She was disgusted at the sort of cant that people were spewing when they were asked to tell embarrassing stories, and they were actually flattering themselves. So I think this is I was too kind to this. I was too self-sacrificing to do this. And I think the truth, of course, it is said that fairy tales are not real, but they are true. They did not happen in a scientific way in the actual world, and they can't be falsified in a laboratory. But they convince us of their philosophical or psychological or anthropological truths. And I think basically, and this brings us back to the novelistic truth and the romantic lie. Girard mentions two works by the same author, the great novelist Marcel Proust, and he says that his main work, his mature masterwork, in Search of Lost Time, in that the hero is sort of faced with his own illusions. The fact that he wanted to like this famous actress because he was told that the actress was very good, and then he was disappointed, and then he was again reassured when somebody who supposedly knew, said that, oh yes, the actress was actually quite good. And so he felt, yes, I was right. I didn't feel it, but apparently I was right. Now then there's an earlier work, Jean Santeuil, which was sort of unearthed later, and it was a youthful work of Proust. And that is actually a self-flattering book, in that the hero actually achieves what he wants to achieve, that I think, I haven't read it, but according to the analysis, it's that he fantasizes about having his box at the theater and being a respected part of high society, and he ends up doing it by his sheer willpower. He becomes this although he's French, he becomes this all-American hero, this rags to riches kind of Horatio Alger kind of thing, and that's nice. But Girard says that's sort of the romantic early work by Proust, and then Proust himself corrected his earlier romantic illusions. And the sad thing is that Jean Santeuil was hailed as the truly youthful, really nice work. And so if it flatters you, it's false, and if it tells an unpleasant truth about you, still leaving something to be done about it or thought about it. Because of course, if something is just mean, it's tantamount to scapegoating. If you say that, oh, he or she is a disgusting person, then you're actually scapegoating him or her. But if the story reveals something about you, either as the narrator or the teller of the story or the main character, then I think the truth is corrective of past mistakes and an unmasker of illusions. And the lie is the opposite. The myth is the opposite. And who can tell about a politician who really talks badly about himself? I mean, not even the best ones do that, or they do it in a false sort of crocodile tear way.
Yeah. No, that's really good. We have like 4 minutes left, and I hate to do it.
Okay.
But Girard's final book is called Battling to the End. And it's his turn to kind of more apocalyptic view of the world. And one of the things that I appreciate about this book is that he takes apocalypse and just kind of takes it away from violence within God and says, this is on us. This is on human beings. And so I love that move. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on, quick thoughts on Battling to the End.
Yeah, yes, we must do the end scene. Yes, definitely, and I think that's the main issue that I would take from Girard, is that we are all guilty, and if there is a God, and he believes there is, but of course not all of us do, then it is very important that the image of God be a non-violent one, and that humans take responsibility for their proclivity, their hardwiredness towards violence, but do not judge that violence by projecting guilt onto this person or that. And I think the book deals with von Clausewitz, the Napoleon era great military Prussian strategist, who said that war is diplomacy through other means. And Girard's argument is that the famous military strategists actually saw something that he did not dare to even admit to himself, namely that there is no good war, that war is always something that threatens to engulf everybody, like total war. And I think, and Girard draws this conclusion that yes, that is the case, but we cannot go back to old sacrifices, the old sort of keeping violence in check by sacrificing individuals and minorities for the whole. The duel is never ending, and if we do not sort of step aside from that, if we don't own up to our violence, then we as a humankind risk self-annihilation. And now for the first time we actually have the means, the technology to do that. And he also said that unfortunately apocalypse is only interesting to fundamentalist Christians who see it as God's wrath raining upon sinful mankind, where they project their own violence towards God. And for Girard, the answer would be to say that own up to your own violence and do not project it on God. Do not project it on other people, but do not project it onto a transcendent deity.
So finally, we will discover who will be president next week. Do you see what? I'm feeling depressed about this. I'm feeling all kinds of negative emotions about it. As I'm smiling, I don't know what else to do. Do you?
I'm trying not to care. You know, I'm going to an ascetic mindset, like whatever. It doesn't hurt me if I don't let it hurt me.
Good. Well, I mean, that's my final question: is where can we find hope? No matter who is president, where can we find hope? And some of this is in how you are handling it. I appreciate it very much, but where's the hope, especially with this very apocalyptic book that Girard ends on? Where do we find hope in the world?
I think, well, that's a big one. That's a tough one.
2 minutes left.
That's a tall order. I think it's about recognition. You know, recognizing the other in yourself. I don't think that radical alterity, the idea that we are all different and therein lies the value of people. I don't personally believe that. I think that the more we see ourselves in the other, the more caring we also become of the other, and paradoxically also of the self. So we have to see our own on the other hand, we have to see our individuality. We should not throw ourselves under the bus for some cause, the end. We should not sacrifice others or ourselves. We should say no to sacrifice. Nobody should die on our watch. But also we should actually see Donald Trump as a living, breathing human being who is very faulty, but who is not it's very difficult to say it, and I can't say it with a straight face, but in a way, he's no worse. When we say that he is the disaster, he is only the disaster if we are the disaster. It's like it's like disown violence, recognize yourself in the other, and tell unflattering stories about yourself.
Excellent. Well, Hanna,
without self-sacrificing, though. It's a hard balance.
It is a hard balance, and I think it's the balance of where Jesus and the Hebrew scriptures say, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Exactly. That's certainly a mimetic element to that, as you were talking about seeing yourself in the other, seeing the divine image in yourself and in the other, even in those that we call our enemies, as Jesus says.
Especially those, yeah.
Yeah, especially those that we call our enemies. So, Hanna, this was an excellent conversation to end.
Well, thank you.
I knew it would be, and thank you for being here. It's been
a little late, but better late than never.
You stayed with us late, and everybody else stayed with us late. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, for your questions. Jim wants me to be sure to tell you, Hanna, that you did a very good job. So.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thank you.
So,
thank you for your questions.
Stevie Young from Taipei says, "Thanks so much, Hanna. We all thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you." This concludes our series on politics and the election for 2016. If you would like to see other videos, they are on the Raven Review website. We've talked about Hitler and Nazi Germany, any connections with the United States. We've talked about Islam and violence. We've talked about voting Christian values. If any of these topics are interesting to you, please go to the Raven Foundation Raven Review website and you can see them there. So also we have other interviews coming up in the near future. So if you want to keep on top of those, feel free to like the Raven Foundation Facebook page, and you can subscribe to Raven Review emails. Thank you again for being here, Hanna.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's a very interesting project.
Excellent. I hope we can do it again sometime soon. So take care.
Definitely. Bye.
Until next time. Grace and peace.
Until next time.